Welcome to Everything Casual, bringing you original football casual videos from the golden era of the 80s and 90s, right up to current day. Football away day stories and historic clashes between football firms. Subscribe so you don't miss out. We upload videos every week. Today's video is a special one. It's all about the very famous Chelsea Headhunters. So much has been written about them. Some of it rubbish and false, some stuff out there by people that was never a part of it. This video is accounts of real lads, top faces such as Danny Eccles Hawkins, Steve Hickey, Hickmott, Andrew Frayne, Kevin Whitten, Mick Greenaway, Babs and more. This video is just about the Headhunters. I will be making another video soon about the Chelsea firms that came before the Headhunters, such as the Shed Boys and Skinheads, so make sure you subscribe to be notified when that one comes out. If you disagree with anything in the video or have a different account of events, then leave a comment. I always welcome real lads setting the record straight. Let's get straight in. The Chelsea Headhunters trace their origins back to the late 1960s and early 1970s, initially known as the Chelsea Shed Boys. They congregated in the Shed End of Stamford Bridge, Chelsea FC's home ground. The group gained prominence in the 1970s and 1980s, a period when football hooliganism was rampant across the UK. The firm was involved in numerous incidents of violence through the United Kingdom and Europe during the 1980s. Its activities inspired numerous prominent Russian hooligan firms, and some high-profile members of the Headhunters took part in football hooliganism in Russia. Let's begin right at the start of the Chelsea firm with Mick Greenaway and the very early days and some of his story. The Shed was forming, but it was still some time before the young lads who gathered behind Greenaway began to resort to violence. In fact, it took a few beatings for Chelsea to get organised. In September 1965, Everton lads invaded the Shed. The following month, Chelsea had a torrid experience in Italy when they played Roma in the Intercities Fairs Cup. A draw was sufficient to see the Londoners through after they had won the home leg, but the Chelsea players were pelted with rubbish from the crowds throughout the entire match, and 2 players were also knocked over. The Chelsea coach was stoned by howling Roma fans as they left the ground under police escort. Greenaway's name was becoming well known beyond the confines of Stamford Bridge. When Manchester United overran the Shed in November 1966, he was struck across the head with a crowbar. A year later, it was the turn of West Ham to run amok, and again, Greenaway was singled out for a severe beating. Chelsea lads rallied to his side, and in future games he was always surrounded by several hard cases who were determined to protect him. By the early 70s, Chelsea was arguably the most glamorous club in London and possibly England. Greenaway was there, in his natural position, leading the small contingent of away fans. He may have been the king of the Shed, but Greenaway was not a natural fighter. His role was more of a protective shepherd, watching over his flock. Chelsea face Martin King cannot recall Greenaway ever throwing a punch in anger, but it is clear that he would never run away from trouble either. "He was a most unlikely leader," wrote King, "but I don't think he ever saw himself that way." Another top Chelsea face, Steve Hickmott, described him as a father figure. His only conviction for football violence came in the year 1983, when Chelsea fans rioted at Brighton. One Sunday, newspaper labelled him as Chelsea's hooligan leader, and he was denounced by the club. He died at the age of 54, but his spirit is still felt, and the Shed was born, and soon new leaders emerged. The first was Daniel Hawkins, better known to Chelsea fans as Eccles. Chelsea was always made up of several small mobs, most based on estates dotted around Berkshire, Surrey and Kent. Come match day, certain figures would emerge as leaders, and during the 70s, the undisputed boss was Eccles. "General Eccles made a big impression on me," recalled Martin Knight. Chelsea's trip to Bolton in 1977 saw Eccles at his organisational best. He marshalled the troops on the football special heading north, and even had a map of the Bolton end, which he huddled over, planning the attack with his lieutenants. A few hundred of Chelsea, on Eccles' instructions, sneaked onto the Bolton cop in ones and twos and got in between the home fans. The roar went up, Bolton scattered, and Chelsea had taken their end. But Eccles wasn't finished. Outside the ground, he ordered a small mob to act as a decoy for the police, while he led the main mob in the search of locals. He took a different approach to West Brom a few weeks later, waiting until the end of the match and attacking home fans as they left the ground. There was a quick tactical retreat when the bulk of West Brom poured out, but, again under Eccles' orders, the small group of 50 Chelsea linked arms and marched towards the mob, causing them to flee. Other ends taken under Eccles' stewardship include Aston Villa's Holt End, Spurs' Shelf, and Arsenal's North Bank. Leading Chelsea alongside Eccles was a one-armed black lad called Babs, whose stocky build and gameness more than compensated for his disability. For some outsiders, it seemed so incomprehensible that a black lad should be such a prominent face at a time when the National Front and British movement were consciously moving into football, and nowhere was this link believed to exist more than at Chelsea. Babs was Chelsea's top boy in a world where white was right, admitted Chris Henderson, who himself was attached to the BM and NF. But, to Henderson and the other right-wing Chelsea, Babs was just that, Chelsea. He was not the only prominent black face around the club. Steph, Black Jim and Black Willie were others. Babs was also a leading mover behind London United, an attempt by some skinhead-based London firms to unite under a common banner to attack Northerners on Friday nights in central London. The idea emerged in 1975 and lasted a few years before Babs had a fight with Steve Woods, a leading West Ham face, and then football rivalries took over. Clothes were important to Babs, and he always ensured that he was smartly turned out. He surrounded himself with a loyal and tight-knit group of followers who would operate independently of Eccles, but normally came together during a match, and certainly for post-match violence, especially away. While Eccles planned his capture of away ends with military precision, and then only when he considered victory likely, Babs' group used more brawn than brain. It was Babs who led the taking of the Wolves' North Bank, an assault that many at Chelsea did not believe Eccles would have made, because there was no guarantee that victory was likely. The men often joined together, but there was also sometimes considerable friction. The North East was a particularly unfriendly region for London clubs to visit, and it didn't get much worse than Sunderland. Chelsea had just been relegated to the second division, and their first game of the season was away at Roker Park. It had been 6 years since Chelsea had played there in the league, which meant for most of those that had climbed aboard the train at King's Cross at 7:30 on a Saturday morning, it was their first visit. Taking control in marshalling Chelsea on their arrival at Seaburn Station was Eccles, calm, thoughtful, and above all, organised. His was the first mob to arrive, and the need to keep everyone together in one little tight mob was paramount. A football special of 700 lads faced an equal number of locals. Suddenly, from the wings, more Sunderland emerged, screaming, shouting, baying for Cockney blood. Chelsea fought back, and eventually ran the home mob. After the game, outside the ground, what seemed like thousands of home supporters began to gather, waiting for the Londoners to come out. Many of Chelsea fidgeted nervously until a young skinny-looking lad with a loud mouth climbed onto a crush barrier and began to speak. "Look at 'em," he shouted, pointing to the Sunderland outside. "A bunch of wankers. They are nothing. No hopers, no jobs, no nothing. They live in caves, this lot, can't even speak English. Let's get out there and kick the shit out of them. Show 'em that we are Chelsea and proud of it. We ain't scared of 'em. They are all bum bandits, and they ain't even proper Geordies." His speech had the desired effect. The crowd roared in approval, and out Chelsea poured, with Babs, Eccles and co. to the fore, and fought viciously and eventually victorious against the massed hordes. The young speechmaker's name was Stephen Hickey Hickmott, and a terrace legend had been born. The following season was arguably Chelsea's worst for hooliganism. The first match was at Leyton Orient, where a wall collapsed as 100 Chelsea lads invaded the pitch. The next away game was Millwall, and there were dozens of arrests as the South Londoners attacked Chelsea from all sides within the ground. 7 days later, there was fierce fighting inside and outside the ground at Plymouth. Chelsea steamed through the Plymouth end, but came under fierce attack afterwards. There was less trouble at home games, but Cardiff was an exception. 4,000 Welshmen travelled down and caused considerable damage to Stamford Bridge, including destroying the club's new scoreboard. There was also trouble at home to Wolves, with clashes on the underground and around the stadium. Chelsea travelled to Kenilworth Road on December 29th, and once again there was trouble. The previous season, Chelsea had invaded the Luton pitch in their hundreds, halted the game and caused widespread disorder. The level of violence had not been the same, but this was mostly because most of the local pubs had been shut for the day and extra police were called in. 30 houses and shop windows were still smashed after Chelsea fans reacted angrily to their team's 4-0 hammering. Inside the ground, some of the fencing which had been installed just before the match collapsed as 3,000 travelling fans surged forward, pressing against it. A few days later, the police admitted that the club had received anonymous written warning about violence prior to the game. If I knew how to make letter bombs, then this would be one. The letter read, "Your ground is going to be a bomb site when we finish. Try stopping us. 20,000 of us feel just like me." Trouble accompanied Chelsea to an FA Cup game at Southampton. Millwall at home was unsurprisingly violent. And then there was Bolton away in the league, the game where Eccles oversaw the taking of the home end. The threat of further disorder caused Notts County to alter the kick-off of their home game against Chelsea, as Notts Forest were also playing at home. The Football League initially refused, but pressure from the club and police convinced them of a rethink. Chelsea's away match at Cardiff earned the headline, "Cardiff's Worst Day of Football Violence in the South Wales Echo." 89 people were arrested and dozens injured after trouble before, during and after the game. Some of the worst disorder occurred inside the ground before a ball had been kicked. A police officer was showered with missiles, and a firework was thrown from the Chelsea end, exploding on the pitch. 47 arrests were made during the match, as rival gangs battled on the terraces of the Grangetown end. Police moved in to make arrests, including one young Chelsea fan that was marched out in a half-Nelson. But the worst came when a Chelsea defender was booked by the referee shortly before half-time. Chelsea fans hurled bottles and beer cans into the grandstand where Cardiff supporters were sitting. 400 Cardiff left the ground 10 minutes before the final whistle and clashed outside with 200 Chelsea lads who had done likewise. It would have taken an army to stop them, a police commander admitted. Trouble continued for an hour after, as Chelsea hunted down their rivals in what police described as the most prolonged period of violence that we have seen during a Cardiff football match. And it still wasn't over. Police literally had to fight Chelsea fans back to the Welsh border. It took 2 hours for one train to travel the 14 miles to Newport, and one carriage had to be taken out of service after the wheels were damaged by the excessive pulling of the emergency brake. The home fixture against Millwall saw dozens more arrests amid scenes of complete chaos. A policeman was stabbed outside the ground, and there were more than 30 arrests. Chelsea went to Charlton over the Easter weekend, still clinging to the hope of promotion, but a 4-0 defeat put an end to that. Chelsea's fans wrecked the ground. A massive bonfire was lit on the terraces from newspapers and match programmes in an attempt to halt the game. And then, shortly before the final whistle, Chelsea fans kicked down the wooden gates and poured out into the street. Cars were damaged and house windows were smashed as the rioting spread into the local neighbourhood. Chelsea's final away game of the season was at Wolves, and British Rail still laid on football specials to take Londoners to the Midlands. The police had anticipated the arrival of hordes of Chelsea and had decided that it was better to allow them into the ground than to have them wandering the streets of Wolverhampton causing trouble. 500 police officers were on duty, but that did not prevent, in the words of Superintendent Roy Mellor, the worst afternoon of violence at Wolves this season. There were 76 arrests and 23 people injured. The trip to Wolves wasn't undertaken without trepidation by Chelsea. Steve Hickmott remembered the feeling of dread as the Chelsea mob entered the infamous Wolves subway on the way to the ground. However, once they had survived the home onslaught in the subway, they carried out the too familiar tactic of slipping into the home end in small groups. The roar went up from Chelsea leader Eccles, and the North Bank was cleared. The final whistle marked the end of a dreadful season of hooliganism, or a great season of it, depending on how you look at it. Hickey had established himself as the main Chelsea face by the end of the 70s. Eckles and Babs virtually disappeared from the scene, and, while Chelsea continued to be a collection of numerous mobs, Hickey was the main man to follow if you wanted action. Most people liked him, but his style was different again from what had gone before, wrote the two Martins, King and Knight. Not for him the glory of taking an end, he wanted the buzz of a definite confrontation, and invariably got it. Millwall were called the Bushwhackers, but Hickey's mob were masters at turning up in unexpected places, or at unexpected times, and confronting unsuspecting mobs. Hickmott's antics became legendary at Chelsea, his stunts as much as his fighting prowess. He was often seen wearing a bright red beret, and at an away game at Swansea, a gorilla suit. At an away game at West Brom, Hickmott and a friend climbed onto the roof of the away terrace. For several minutes they entertained the away support, dancing and prancing about, to the horror of West Brom officials. Eventually even Hickmott got bored, and in one last act launched himself off the roof and into the crowd below. At an away game at Huddersfield in the year 1982, Hickmott's mob steamed into the home end, chasing off far superior numbers. Despite the best and most vicious efforts of the locals, the Chelsea group could not be moved. At the final whistle, Hickmott stood on the edge of the pitch and shook hands with all his Chelsea compatriots. Hickmott's coach trips became infamous. They started with a single coach taking himself and friends from his home in Tunbridge Wells, but before long the service had grown to several coaches picking up from points across London. Flyers were printed and tickets sold long before match days. There was even a song, sung to the tune of "When Johnny Comes Marching Home." Now let's hear about another Chelsea Terrace legend called Bully. This is his story taken from the brilliant book by Martin King called Bully CFC. This is Bully's story, all in his own words. I had a Chelsea tattoo on my arm, and F me, did it hurt. Anyone that says tattoos when they are being done don't hurt are liars. I thought I looked the dogs with the Chelsea badge on my arm. I would stroll into the North Stand. That's where all the lads went in those days, with a short-sleeved shirt on, and show off my badge of honour. In them days, Hickey was running the show over at Chelsea, especially to away games up north, where he ran Hickey's luxury coaches to all sorts of far-flung northern outposts. He was, in fact, a great bloke to know. He was very well spoken, with a great sense of humour. He would have everyone in stitches with all his stories, and his exploits were legendary. I knew of him and had heard his name so many times before we actually met, and it was Bristol City away in about 79 or 80 when I got to meet him. A few of us were sitting in the seats on the side, and Hickey came over to our group and said that he had arranged a row with the Bristol firm at half-time. He said they were coming around to the Chelsea end, and as it turned out, they and he were true to their word. They came around at half-time and went straight into them and done them. We held them off at first, and then we got the upper hand and smashed them. Some mug was standing in front of me, doing all the karate moves like Bruce Lee. but I soon put paid to him with a cup of steaming hot Bovril in his face. All that Kung Fu Lark can F right off. After the game, it was a different story, and it was our turn to get smashed. There were only about 30 of us, and as we came out, they were everywhere. We were surrounded, and there was nowhere to go. It looked like we were about to get hammered. There was a bit of a standoff, and then in seconds our whole end emptied out onto the street. And now it was game on. And now it's a different story as we backed the Bristol firm all the way up the street. After that, I went to every game, home and away. I even went to friendlies and a pre-season tour of Sweden, where I ended up being deported. Me and my mate Jermaine were on a boat from Hamburg to Sweden, when we got into a fight with some Germans. We threatened to throw one of them overboard. When we arrived in Sweden, we didn't think no more of it. And come off the boat and into passport control, the old bill came from everywhere, and we were marched off into a little side room to be questioned. We were marched back onto the boat at gunpoint and sent back off to Hamburg, where, on arrival, our passports were handed back to us. That was our Sweden trip, 2 days to get there, and 2 hours in Sweden before we were booted off out of it. Around the year 1985, I started hearing the name the Chelsea Headhunters, and to tell you the truth, I didn't really take a lot of notice. It wasn't until years later that all the Chelsea firm got labelled with that name, and the tabloid press loved it. For them, it had a certain ring to it. People from other clubs would ask me if I was in the Headhunters, and my reply was, "No, I'm Chelsea North Stand." We used to have a good firm in there, and depending on who we were playing, it would kick off. It took the old Bill years to get clued up on the North Stand. Then it became away supporters only, but that didn't stop us from trying to infiltrate it. The police would have a line across the gates before you reached the turnstiles, and they would quiz anyone who looked a bit suspect on who they supported. Depending on who we were playing, you've never heard so many bad Scouse, Manc or Brommy accents. If the old Bill didn't like the look of you, then it was a shove in the back and a go on F off up the other end. I have even seen genuine away fans turned away in total shock at the prospect of having to mix with us lot out in the street. There would be packs of young Chelsea faces hanging around like a pack of wolves. In those days, the old North Stand itself was still up, and then, for some reason or other, it was pulled down. I don't know if it was for safety reasons, but it never did look too safe. For those that don't remember it, it was the old North Stand end of the ground, where later on you would find the Matthew Harding stand. To best describe it, it looked like a seating area on stilts. There were seats above and terracing underneath it. It was in the corner right next to the old East Stand and covered about a quarter of the North Stand terrace. It was an old-looking piece of architecture. On the football front, I was going as often as I could. Derby County away in 1981 was probably some of the worst violence I have ever witnessed at a football match. To put it politely, it was effing mental. About 4,000 of 5,000 Chelsea fans travelled up there, the majority by British Rail football specials. We came straight out of Derby Station and found a pub, and if I remember rightly, it was called the Victoria anyway. That got wrecked. We just took the whole pub over. Someone found the key for the shed out the back, where all the stock was kept, so spirits and beer was being passed out, handed around and drunk. Now everyone was oiled up. The bar staff couldn't work out why everyone was stumbling around drunk, and yet nobody was paying at the bar for the bottles of beer and spirits they were drinking. Everyone was getting more and more drunk, and the pub more packed as the word spread that the Victoria was the pub for a free drink. They had ornamental swords hanging on the walls, and it wasn't long before they went missing. Next thing the pub empties as word goes around that Spurs are in town. Apparently a mob of Spurs had stopped off in Derby on their way to Nottingham to play Forest, and had slapped a few Chelsea scarfers. They didn't realise just how big a mob we had out that day, but they soon found out, as we found them on the platform of the station and smashed them to bits. They got mullered. They were running down the tracks to get away, and one geezer locked himself in the station waiting room. As we came out of the station, a mob of Derby appeared and came straight into us. It was one of the longest rows that I have ever seen at football. It went on relentless for a good 5 minutes. People were being hit and either went down or carried on fighting. No one from either side took a backward step. The old Bill just couldn't stop it. Finally, the two firms were pushed apart with, I would have to say, the honours going to Derby, so fair play to them. Inside the ground, a few of us got into the home end and it kicked off. We stayed in there until just before half-time, and then the old Bill moved in and slung us out and put us in with the rest of the Chelsea masses. Afterwards, it was going off everywhere as we were escorted back to the station. I will give Derby their due. They came into us at every opportunity. At every street corner, they would make a stand, and we would roar across the road at them, and then another mob of theirs would come from the other side of the street, or from behind us. The Derby streets were only narrow with rows and rows of brick-built terraced houses, and the sound of rioting echoed through the streets that day. On that day's performance, I rate Derby's firm highly. There was only 13,000 fans at the baseball ground for that game, and Clive Walker scored for us, and some geezer Osgood scored for them. It wasn't the great Peter Osgood scoring an own goal, but a Derby player named Keith Osgood. I wonder what happened to him. Cambridge away was another game where we took huge numbers. 5 of us drove from Romford and stopped in some little picturesque village outside Cambridge. On the trip, that day was me, Jermaine, Windmill, Wingnut and Doddy. We had a few beers and talked about football and what to expect from Cambridge's firm that day. A few of the boys even doubted that Cambridge had a firm. "Ain't it all students on bikes dressed in black cloaks with mortarboards on their heads?" one of the lads asked. "The thing is, little teams like Cambridge, Oxford, York and Hereford can pull good firms on their day and will always turn out for the big boys. They may not meet their visitors head on, but they will turn out and have a pop and do a quick kamikaze attack. Teams like Cambridge couldn't go toe-to-toe with teams like us or Manchester United or Leeds or Spurs, but if there were 50 of us and 50 of them, they would give a good account of themselves." On the day we parked up near the ground and bumped into Hickey, who had run one of his coaches up there. It was agreed that we would all pay to go into the home end and meet up at the back. We devised a plan that I would make out that one of the lads was deaf and dumb, and that I would do all the talking. Outside the turnstiles, under the watchful eye of the local old Bill, I tried my hand at some sign language. It worked, as I paid for both of us to get in, and we sailed in without a hitch. Our mob was everywhere, and within 5 minutes of mobbing up, it kicked off. About 10 of us got separated from the rest of the lads, and we were having a right old battle in the corner. Outside, we swarmed all over them, and gave the Cambridge leader, the general, a good hiding. Really, Hickey saved him from further punishment. He was on the ground nearly spark out. "Hang on, lads, he's had enough," said Hickey. "No, he ain't," said a few of us. "He's a gobby mug who deserves all he gets." He was only in his early 20s, if that, and he hardly had any hair, and he had a face like E.T. and was about as fat as a chip. The poor lad didn't have a lot going for him. While we were arguing amongst ourselves, this little hobbit slipped away. Near the exit, Cambridge came back into us, and the old Bill, in a bit of a panic, closed the gates shut, and a few of us were trapped inside the ground with their firm. Outside, on the other side of the gates, the old Bill was having a right job in holding the Chelsea hordes back from joining us. That was the first time I met Giles from Chelsea, and since that day we have been good friends. I know a few teams have come stuck at Cambridge. They have a game little mob. Music-wise, I fell out of love with it. It was the time of the New Romantics with Duran Duran, but they did nothing for me. A funny story from our trip to Cambridge was of a local fisherman sitting on a brick bridge without a care in the world with his rod in his hand. It was very quaint and picture postcard. He looked very relaxed, as he sat just across the way from us. We could see him as we made our way into the ground, and the next thing some Chelsea fans walked past him and gave him a shove in the back and sent him flying into the flowing waters. It was a miracle, but he landed upright with his fishing rod still in his hand. But the waters were lapping around his chin and he was in a bit of a panic. Next thing the old Bill have turned up, and in their attempts to rescue him, a couple of them have slid down the muddy river bank and gone arse over tit straight into the water. Hundreds of Chelsea fans cheered and laughed as the Keystone Cops made a right balls up of their rescue. In those days, we played teams like Wrexham, Preston, Orient and Grimsby. Life was shit in the old second division, but to us die-hard Chelsea fans were very loyal. It's a pity some of the players didn't have the same enthusiasm as us fans. One nice fixture in those days was a trip down to Cardiff. I rate them in the top 10 firms in the UK. Over the years, they've had some battles with their old rivals from the Den, Millwall. For the game down there, a few of us met at Paddington Station early and used our student rail cards and Purcell vouchers to get train tickets. Suddenly, a mob of around 100 geezers came marching towards us. We knew they wasn't Chelsea. "Is this your firm, Chelsea?" asked the huge black geezer fronting this mob. "No," I said, looking around a bit nervously, as there was only about 40 of us scattered around. "We're meeting up in Cardiff." "Right, make sure you're back here after the game, as we've a few things to sort," said the black geezer, looking straight into my eyes, and sounding as if he really meant it. With that, they turned and strolled out of the station. That was Cass and the ICF. A couple of our boys said. They could have taken a few liberties as they well outnumbered us. But I suppose they must have looked at it that we hadn't run when they turned up. What the hell was they doing at Paddington at that time of the morning? We found some seats on the first train down to Wales and cracked open a few cans of beers. We needed something to calm our nerves after that close shave. After that, what would Cardiff have waiting for us? We pulled into Cardiff station and came out and walked across to the big pub right opposite. Once inside, we met up with a few other faces who had driven down. Things were looking a little better. We found a seat near the window and settled down with a beer. Outside, we could see a few Cardiff spotters walking past and trying to have a sneaky look inside the pub. The old Bill hadn't sussed us yet, and were nowhere to be seen. Next minute, 150 Cardiff came towards the pub. The windows went in and they were bouncing up and down outside. We instinctively held the doors and they couldn't get in. We repelled their first attacks, and then the old Bill turned up and forced us out of the pub. The Cardiff mob stood on the other side of the road laughing. They wasn't bothered at all about the old Bill, who pointed out to us that Cardiff's firm were across the road, and warned us that if it went off again, they would step back, watch, and then pick up the pieces. Just then, another train pulled in, and 200 of our boys piled out onto the street. Up the front were the usual suspects: Hickey, Giles, Skitsy, Rutland, and Ian from Lewisham. Now the only pieces the police would be picking up would be Welsh pieces. We moved off as the old Bill fucked off and left us to it. We came to a crossroads and 100-strong Cardiff mob met us head-on. Through sheer weight of numbers, we ran them up the road. Now, the old Bill was back. They obviously didn't like what they were seeing. We came to a bridge and they came into us again. Up ahead, we could see Ninian Park, and again they came into us from 3 different sides. Bricks and bottles came through the air at us. This was a violent attack, and to be honest, a few of our lads got done. We had nowhere to go, and we couldn't back off. The old Bill now took control and pushed Cardiff back up towards the ground. Then, they surrounded us and slowly marched us through the streets. Every now and again, the police escort would stop, and the coppers at the front would clear away through the crowds. I will give the Welsh boys their due. They took their fighting seriously, and were all well game. Every single one of them. There were a few of our lot with split and cut heads and black eyes. Thank you for watching. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you subscribe, you will be notified when we release a new video. It could be your firm we make a video about next, so don't miss out and hit the subscribe button. You can find me on Facebook or email me if you have a good story to tell. See you next time.